Today I'd like to continue our journey through chapter 11 of the Gospel of Matthew. And take a look at verses 25 to 27, which talk about the praise of the Father. And Jesus has just expressed his upsetment with the people for really not accepting the message. And he's talking about how it's going to be bad for them and terrible on the day of judgment, and it'd be better for Sodom and for Tyre and Sidon than it will be for all these other cities. So you get the impression that at this point, Jesus is not doing too well in his ministry. It's like if you look at a ministry progress report, you would say, oh, this ministry is not looking good. You might give it a C or a D at this point, maybe even an F. Is Jesus failing? It doesn't seem like there's much receptivity to his message. And of course, this is when after the messengers of John the Baptist come to Jesus and saying, "Are you the one?" So people are wondering, is Jesus really the one, or is there somebody else? And so, at this point, you look at it and say, Jesus is in trouble. But of course, that's us looking at the situation. This is not from the point of view of Jesus and what he is feeling necessarily. And I think we reflect sometimes our own sense in ministry, our own sense in our vocation, our own sense in our job, our own sense with our family, sometimes feeling like a failure and thinking things aren't going too well, but then kind of reflecting and saying, well wait a minute. Maybe I'm being too harsh, or maybe things are going better than I think, or maybe this is God's will for me. And at this point, Jesus is going to turn to the Father. And in verse 25, it says, at that time, Jesus said in reply, I give praise to you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth. For although you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned, you have revealed them to the childlike. So Jesus has just talked about these different towns that have not accepted him. And in verse 24, he talks about it being more tolerable for Sodom than it will be for these lands. But then he turns and he gives praise to the Father. You kind of say to yourself, well, Jesus, things aren't going that well. Why are you giving praise to the Father? Shouldn't it be more like, gee, Father, help me here? People are not getting the message. Things aren't going too well. It's there are problems here. But in spite of the apparent negativity and lack of reception, Jesus does not focus on that. He focuses on the Father, on his relationship with the Father, and on his vocation, which is to give praise to the Father. And of course, that vocation of Jesus is the same vocation for all of us. We're called to do what? To, in our lives, give praise to the Father and thank the Father for what we have been given. We might think the results aren't going that well. We might think there is no receptivity. We might think people aren't getting it. But it's not about that. It's about my life giving praise to the Father and thanking the Father for the blessings I have been given. The receptivity or lack of receptivity, that's in the hands of God the Father, not within ourselves. So Jesus models that for us. And he talks about the Father being Lord of heaven and earth. And if the Father is Lord of heaven and earth, what are we saying? We're saying we're not Lord of heaven and earth. We're not the one who's going to determine outcomes or receptivity or how our ministry is going. Sometimes we get a lot of positive feedback, but maybe things aren't happening within people that the Father is expecting or looking for. And sometimes we might get negative feedback, which is the opposite. Things might be going very well with the person because it's from the point of view of the Father, who is the Lord of both heaven and earth, and we are not. So we get a different perspective. So Jesus then goes on to say, well, you've hidden these things from the wise and the learned. So those who supposedly have all the answers, these things get hidden. So it says to me, when we think we have the answers, when we think we know everything, that's when we're really in trouble. And that's when we're not cooperating with the Father, because it's about us and not about the Father and the Father's will and what the Father wants to accomplish. So we do our best. We try to be faithful. We try to deliver the message. We try to love God. We try to love our sisters and brothers. And then we leave it in God's hands, because He is the Lord of heaven and earth. And those who are wise, and if they're all figured out, they're in trouble. And then Jesus says, you have revealed them to the childlike. So there's something about the importance of being like a child. And again, this isn't childish. This is childlike. What is the word that is being used here? Because that would be important. The Greek word is epioi, which means the dependence of one who is needy. So a person who is epioi is a person who is dependent on someone else, who acknowledges that they have a need and needs the help, the assistance of the other. And of course, when you look at it, we are all epioi in one degree or another. No one is completely and totally 100% independent. We need others. We need others to function. As much as we want to be independent and think we can do everything on our own, when something breaks down that we don't know how to fix, we're in trouble, right? When there is a problem that is presented to us that we can't solve, we're in trouble, right? And so we turn to others. We are epioi. We are childlike at that point. And Jesus could be referring to a lot of different people at this point with the epioi, but certainly he would be referring to the apostles. The apostles are beginners, they're inexperienced. Jesus has told them it's going to be difficult to be a follower. And Jesus himself has reflected the difficulty because he has encountered it personally. Many people in these towns have not accepted him. The number of disciples seems to be small at this point, even though Jesus has done many miracles and wonderful teachings. So when we are beginners, when we are inexperienced, we need other people. We are childlike in that sense. We are epioi. And so we need to turn to God. And this is what Jesus seems to be doing here. He has a moment of difficulty in his ministry. He's turning to the Lord. And the wise people, who kind of maybe hide in the law and the learning, they are putting up obstacles to this epioi, this dependence on God. They're kind of saying, I've studied hard. I know the law. I have it mastered. I can do this. I know this. Follow me. And Jesus is saying, well, wait a minute. Isn't it about following our God? And then in verse 26, Jesus says, yes, Father, such has been your gracious will. But Jesus is saying, well, maybe certain people aren't going to accept the good news, but it's your will, and you will work it out. I will give my best effort. I'm doing the miracles. I'm preaching. Still doesn't seem to be going that great, but it's your will, and I will follow your will. And then he sums it up in verse 27 and says, all things have been handed over to me by my Father. No one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wishes to reveal him. So God has given me all, and I know the Father, and I am the only one who knows the Father, and I will reveal the Father to others. This, of course, is a complete contradiction to the Jewish claim to have the complete revelation of God in the law and the prophets. Jesus says, no, it's been given to him. This, in many ways, from a Jewish perspective, would be an outrageous claim. All things have been handed over to me by my Father. Well, what about the law and the prophets? That comes from the Father. And that's certainly important. And it's a great revelation. But Jesus has a relation with the Father that other people do not share. He has this intimacy with the Father. And Jesus is saying he's going to share that with others. What a gift. Jesus, in his generosity, will share the Father with all of us.